There are two headers that France has never forgotten. July 12th, 1998, the Stade de France in Saint-Denis. 20 minutes into the World Cup final against Brazil. Zinedine Zidane, born in Marseille to Algerian immigrants, a boy from La Castellane, one of the most deprived housing estates in France, rises above the Brazilian defense and heads the ball into the net. 27 minutes later, he does it again. France won 3-0. Emmanuel Petit added a third in the dying minutes. The trophy was lifted by Didier Deschamps, the captain, the water carrier, the man whose job was to make everyone else better, and who performed that job so completely it was sometimes easy to miss how extraordinary he was at it. 1 million people flooded the Champs-Élysées. 3 words were projected onto the Arc de Triomphe: Zidane, Président, France. But very few people today know the full story of what happened to those players after the trophy was lifted. Which ones built second careers as remarkable as their first? Which ones disappeared entirely? And which one retired from football and went home to his village and started fishing? This is the story of France, 1998. Les Bleus, the Rainbow Team. And this is the answer to the question nobody thought to ask. Is anyone still alive? To understand France 1998, you first have to understand what France looked like to itself in the late 1990s. It was a country in conversation about identity, immigration, integration, national belonging, live political debates with real consequences. The football team Aimé Jacquet built reflected the France that existed rather than the France some politicians preferred to imagine. Players with roots in Algeria, Ghana, Martinique, New Caledonia, Argentina, Senegal. Born in Marseille, in Paris, in the suburbs that French maps sometimes seem to forget existed. They were called the Rainbow Team. Some meant it as a compliment. Some did not. What happened on the pitch that summer settled the argument in a way no political speech could have. Jacquet had been savaged by the French press for years, labeled a dinosaur, an anachronism. He ignored it with the serenity of someone who had decided the journalists would not be on the pitch in July. The squad he assembled was one of the finest ever gathered. Zinedine Zidane, already recognized as one of the finest midfielders in the world, marked by the particular weight brilliant players of immigrant heritage carry in countries uncertain how to feel about them. Didier Deschamps, the captain, the defensive midfielder, the man Zidane described as the lungs of the team, Lilian Thuram, a right-back so complete that the position barely contained him, Marcel Desailly, the Rock, Laurent Blanc, the elegant libero who would miss the final through suspension. In midfield, Emmanuel Petit and Patrick Vieira, 2 players of such dominance that opponents simply stopped trying to play through that corridor. Up front, a young Thierry Henry, barely 20 years old, Yuri Djorkaeff providing creativity, David Trezeguet waiting on the bench. France were playing at home. The expectation was enormous. The whole country held its breath. France's group stage was competent rather than spectacular. A 3-0 win over South Africa. A 4-0 demolition of Saudi Arabia. The match in which Zidane was sent off for stamping, earning a 2-match suspension that removed him from crucial knockout entries against Paraguay and Denmark. France won both without him, but it functioned differently. Less fluid, more reliant on individual moments. The semifinal against Croatia was one of the tournament's finest matches. Croatia scored first through Schuker, and then Lilian Thuram did something nobody who knew his career expected. Thuram scored. He had played over 70 international matches without a goal. He scored to equalize in the 57th minute. Then he scored again in the 75th to put France ahead. 2 goals in the biggest match of his career from a man with 0 international goals before and 0 after. But the most dramatic chapter was still ahead. The final. Brazil Ronaldo. The mystery that surrounded the Brazilian team in the hours before kickoff. The convulsive fit, the team list resubmitted with Ronaldo's name restored. The ghost of a player, clearly not himself, taking the field. Zidane headed. Zidane headed again. Petit finished. France 3, Brazil 0. The Stade de France erupted. A million people went to the Champs-Élysées, and 3 words glowed on the Arc de Triomphe. No one could have predicted what the years would bring for the men who produced that evening. What happened to the team's biggest star in the years that followed surprised everyone, including those who thought they understood Zinedine Zidane. He moved to Real Madrid in 2001 for a world record fee. He won the Champions League in 2002, scoring one of the greatest goals in the competition's history. A left-foot volley from a Roberto Carlos cross in the final that still appears on best-ever goal lists a quarter-century later. He retired from playing in 2006 at the World Cup in Germany, in the most dramatic circumstances his career could have provided, headbutting Marco Materazzi in the chest in the final, being shown a red card, walking past the World Cup trophy on his way to the tunnel in the last minutes of his professional life. He managed Real Madrid from 2016 to 2018 and won 3 consecutive Champions League titles, the only manager in history to achieve that. He resigned immediately after the third. He resigned again in 2021. He is in his early 50s. He has not managed since. French football still waits for him, as it has always waited, to decide what comes next. Few people knew what the squad's most unexpected hero was carrying after the tournament ended. Stéphane Guivarc'h had been France's starting striker at the 1998 World Cup. He played every match. He scored 0 goals. He was the top striker of a World Cup winning team who finished the tournament without a single contribution visible in the statistics that matter most for his position. In football history, this is one of the more remarkable achievements. He signed for Newcastle United after the tournament, moved to Rangers, returned to France. His career after 1998 was the career of a competent professional rather than a World Cup champion. He retired in 2002. He returned to his village in Brittany. He went fishing. The man who played every match of France's World Cup winning campaign is currently working for a company owned by a friend that sells swimming pools. No one could have predicted what happened to Lilian Thuram, the man who scored twice in the semifinal and never scored before or after. He retired in 2008 with 142 international caps. He did not go into coaching or broadcasting. He went into activism. He founded the Lilian Thuram Foundation, dedicated to fighting racism through education. He authored a book called White Thinking, examining how racism operates in European societies. He gives lectures at universities and political forums. The footballer who scored 2 goals in the biggest match of his life became one of France's most prominent voices on racial equality. Fabien Barthez, the Golden Glove winner, shaved head, theatrical presence, left football in 2007 and went racing. He competed in Le Mans. He drove in various motorsport competitions with the same focused intensity he brought to goalkeeping. He is in his early 50s. He is still here. Vicente Lizarazu, the left-back whose pace and engine had been essential to the system Jacquet built, became one of the most recognizable faces in French sports media. He worked as a television consultant for TF1, appeared regularly as a pundit during major tournaments, and pursued a parallel career in judo and jiu-jitsu, earning black belts in both disciplines well into his 40s. He opened a surf and lifestyle brand in Biarritz, the Basque coastal town where he grew up. He is in his mid-50s. He is still here. Christian Carambeu, born in New Caledonia, a French territory in the South Pacific, one of several players whose presence embodied the Rainbow Team's geographic reach, became an advocate for the rights of indigenous Pacific peoples after retiring. He has spoken publicly about colonialism in New Caledonia and worked to raise awareness of the Kanak people's culture and political struggles. He remains a respected voice on questions of identity and heritage that the 1998 squad, in its composition, had always quietly represented. Christophe Dugarry, who scored in the opening match against South Africa, became a television and radio pundit. He has remained close to Zidane personally, the two having been friends since their youth careers, and has spoken candidly about that friendship and what 1998 meant to both of them. The survivors of the 1998 squad, and they are all survivors, because this is one of the rare World Cup squads to have lost no members to death, have followed paths as varied as the backgrounds that made them the Rainbow Team. Didier Deschamps managed Monaco, Juventus, Marseille, and then the French national team. With France, he won the 2018 World Cup in Russia, becoming only the third person in history to win the World Cup as both player and coach. He led France to the 2022 World Cup final, where they lost on penalties to Argentina. He stepped down following the 2026 World Cup. He is in his early 50s. His second act has been, by any measure, as consequential as his first. Emmanuel Petit is a pundit on TalkSport, the most outspoken voice in the room, still willing to say the thing that makes people uncomfortable. He is still here. Thierry Henry, 20 years old in 1998, a substitute who watched the final from the bench, became one of the greatest forwards in the history of the sport. 2 Premier League titles with Arsenal, the unbeaten season of 2003 to 2004, 228 goals for the Gunners. He moved into management. Monaco, Montreal Impact, Belgium national team. He is in his late 40s. He is still here. The distance between the substitute who watched from the bench and the player he became afterward is one of the great developmental stories in football. Laurent Blanc managed France, Paris Saint-Germain, Lyon, and Al Ittihad, still working. Robert Pires is involved in the Balear League, an indoor 6-a-side competition mixing former professionals with celebrities. Marcel Desailly works as a pundit and UNICEF ambassador. Yuri Djorkaeff appears on football shows. Patrick Vieira managed Nice, Crystal Palace, and Strasbourg before leaving management in 2023. Lilian Thuram writes books and gives lectures, and Stefan Givarch sells swimming pools in Brittany. The tournament may have ended, but their legacy still lives in football history. France 1998 was not simply a sporting achievement, it was a cultural moment the country has been processing for nearly 30 years. The Rainbow Team, with players from Algeria, Ghana, Martinique, New Caledonia, Argentina, Senegal, and metropolitan France, won the World Cup on home soil and offered briefly a version of France that looked like the France that actually existed. What that meant, and what it continues to mean, is a question French society returns to regularly. In 2000, the same core won the European Championship. Back-to-back titles with the same generation, the most dominant period in French football history. The 2018 World Cup was won by Deschamps as manager. With a different generation, but the same institutional framework, built on the foundation of what 1998 had proven was possible. A direct line runs from Jacquet's squad to Deschamps, from the Stade de France in 1998 to the Luzhniki in Moscow 20 years later. Zidane's name was projected on the Arc de Triomphe in 1998. His statue stands outside the Stade de France. He is the most famous French footballer in history, which carries considerable weight given that he came from a housing estate in Marseille that France was not always sure how to include in its self-image. The 2 headers in the final were the most visible answer that the question of French identity ever received from a football pitch. Nobody from that squad has died. Every player who lifted that trophy on July 12, 1998 is still here, managing, broadcasting, activating, lecturing, racing, fishing, selling swimming pools in Brittany. For one unforgettable summer in France, the Rainbow Team showed the world what their country could be when it included all of itself. 28 years later, that argument is still being made, and it still needs making.